Welcome to Meets Rod Shop. I'm Jason. Today I got my 1979 Chevrolet C10 Silverado pickup named Cream Puff on the lift. We're going to go ahead, we're going to change the rear shocks, we're going to change the rear brake hardware, wheel cylinders, and just kind of go around from there. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, as you can see here, you got the old spirals on these shocks. They're probably original to the truck. So you got a stud on the back side of the frame you got to get to, and then you've got this lower bolt here to change. The other side's pretty much the same way, except for the shock goes towards the back instead of the front. So let's go ahead and get on that. All right, you have a 13/16 headed bolt, and you have a 7/8 nut on this side. So I'm gonna try and hold the camera and the wrench at the same time. There you go. All right, the shocks I'm using today are these Gabriel Pro Guards, part number 61524. The reason why is they were on sale at Rock Auto for like 15 bucks a piece. Perfect. All right, once you get the old shock out, go ahead and set the new stud in there like you're supposed to. Place it through the frame. You'll go ahead and you'll put the lock washer and the nut on the back side and tighten her up. Put the lock washer on. Go ahead and put the nut on. Go ahead and tighten her back up. All right, now that you got her tightened up, you can go ahead and cut this little strap, if you can get to it. And get ready with your bolt. Then go ahead, and she's coming down, stick your bolt in. All right, now that the bolt's in, let's go and put your lock washer back on and tighten her back up. All right, I've got the transmission out of the truck. I've got the pan off. I want to go ahead and change the filter. I'm going to show you one thing I always do with all my transmission pans. I always put a drain plug in. It's nice being able to drain these things without splashing all over the place. And I'll just tell you the cheap and easy way I do it. It may not be the right way, but it's the way that I do it. I go up to the big box store and I'll buy a 1/4 inch pipe fitting. What I'll do is I'll get the like a 3/8 to 1/4 inch adapter, and then I just get a 1/4 inch plug. What I'll do is I'll cut down the adapter. It's real shallow. You don't need it to be sticking up out of the pan. And then I'll bore a hole through the pan and I'll weld that plug in there, or excuse me, I'll weld the adapter in there. That way the plug can screw in and out. And that's how I do it. It's real quick, it's easy. It costs like $3 to do it. And I'll usually buy a few at a time. That way I don't have to run up to the store on the weekend if I don't have one. But that's what I do. I'll go ahead and show you the finished product here in a second. All right, so here you can see where I cleaned up the hole and I bored a hole through the pan, and then there's that little fitting, like I said, that I cut down and ground the edges down. So you'll go ahead and fit it in there, then you'll just go ahead and burn that plug right into the corner. All right, and there you have it. The plug is welded in there, not very well. I'm not a welder, I'm more of a grinder. But you can see the plug's welded in there, and then that center plug will come out. Don't use galvanized. Obviously, you don't want to weld on galvanized, but it can be tough. Keep your heat low. You don't want to be burning a whole lot of heat into this pan. It's thin metal, and you're welding a thick bushing into there. But I'll go ahead and clean up the back side. We'll throw a magnet in the pan, and then we'll change the filter and throw the pan back on. All right, while we're waiting for ye old oil pan, or transmission pan, excuse me, to dry, because I put a fresh coat of paint on it, we're going to change out this front pump seal. You can see I've already yanked the torque converter out. They're real easy. Just spin them and pull and they'll pop out. Just realize you will drop a bunch of transmission fluid. So just take a screwdriver, get in there, get around the lip of it, and pop it loose, if she'll let you. All right, I got the front seal out. I've got the new one here. One thing you want to do on the back side of here, I don't know if there's any springs. There is a spring. So there's a spring on the inside of this lip here. You want to take some Vaseline, or like I'll use trans goo, and I'll pack trans goo in there. That way when I'm knocking it in, the spring doesn't pop off that seal, because then it won't seal. So let's go ahead and get that done. All right, I've got the transmission assembly lube packed into the back side of this seal. That way the spring won't pop off. Go ahead, take a lintless rag. I'm going to clean around where the seal goes. If you got a piece of PVC or pipe that will fit right over that seal, you can drive it in straight. I don't, so I'm just going to tap it in with a hammer. All right, she's tapped in there. You want to make sure you want to lube the outside of your torque converter and we slide it back on. Or like what I've already done is I lubed the inside of that seal. You don't want that dry, that way it doesn't smoke when it first cranks up. So let's go ahead and we'll spin this transmission around. We'll change the output shaft now. All right, to get the yoke off, it's a 3/4 inch bolt. There you go. The yoke's off. You want to do the same thing as before, just take a screwdriver, go around the edge, knock the seal out. If you get the seal edge to pop up, you take a pair of ice grips, clamp it on there, and kind of use the leverage to pop out the seal. There you go. All right, I got my output shaft seal. I'm running it's a Napa 18992. Yeah, 18992. So that's the Napa oil seal that I'm using for the output shaft on this TH400. For the torque converter shaft seal, I'm running a Timken 6712 Nancy Alpha. That's a 6712 Nancy Alpha. That's for the torque converter shaft seal. But I did that earlier, so I forgot to tell you the part number. So same thing here, grab a socket or something. I've got a, what is this? I don't know. It's a Gigundo 3/4 inch drive socket that fits the seal real nice. So go ahead, pack it full of that trans goo or Vaseline as well. Then go ahead, just drive it on. There you go. She's installed. All right, let's go ahead and put the output shaft in. One thing I'll do is I'll take a little bit of RTV and I'll just spread it on the inner splines. That way lube doesn't leak past it. Don't take a whole lot, just a little tiny bit in there. Was that old commercial, Little Dab will do her? Probably a bit old for, hell, I think it's even old for my generation. But just go ahead, put a little RTV on the splines. Again, you want to lube the shaft, which I already did. Want to make sure there's no heavy grooves in it. That way the seal is going to have something to seal against. Slide her on in there. I would suggest putting a little dab of blue Loctite on the bolt, which I'll go ahead and do now just to make sure it doesn't back off. Don't get crazy with it, just a little bit will do. Don't use the red, it's fine thread, but just a little bit of blue Loctite. And then go ahead and torque her down. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not sure what the torque is on this. I just give it a couple of ugga-duggas. One thing I suggest doing with your pan, after you've welded in your bung, you may want to put a little bit of trans fluid in there, see if it leaks. You'd hate to go ahead, put this thing all the way on there, fill it, and then find out you're dripping a little bit in case you need to re-weld it. All right, so I've got the pan gasket laying on here. This pan did not have a magnet in it, but I had a spare one from one of my other transmission builds. All right, so we're ready to put the pan on. I got the gasket on here. I did use a little sealer on the pan side only. I did stick a magnet in the bottom of the pan. It did not have one in there when I pulled the pan, but I had one from another build, so I threw it on there. The torque on this is 130 inch-pounds. I do suggest you torque these. With these rubber gaskets, they're known to squeeze out, and there's no metal insert for like anti-crush on these bolt holes. So we will torque these. I'm not going to zing them down. We'll torque them to 130 inch-pounds. All right, all this transmission lacks now is we need to change the speedometer shaft, I guess the, I don't know what you call it, the assembly. There's an O-ring and then there's an inner O-ring as well where the gear goes in, but I'll show you that when we take it apart. But I'm gonna throw it on the bench to do that. For now though, we're done. So it's got a new filter, it's got a new pan gasket, we put a drain plug in there, we put the torque converter shaft seal in there, and we put the output shaft seal in there. So this transmission, like I said, other than that speedo leak, should be good to go. So there should be no leaks. And this is just something you could do real quick on a weekend. You know, if you got a lot of leaks or you get a new truck and you want to make sure it's up to snuff for a while, go ahead and change all this stuff out. So I gave you the part numbers for the output shaft seal, for the torque converter shaft seal. I didn't give you a part number for the filter, let me tell you that. So the filter kit we're using is a Baldwin. It's a 6020 is the part number for the filter kit for this thing. And again, I know in the beginning I told you this was a turbo 350. It's actually a turbo 400 transmission. So I was incorrect in my transmission diagnosis when I bought this truck. If you can't tell, I'm not a Chevy guy. This is the first Chevy I've really been dealing with. So I'm new to it, so please forgive me for that. Or don't forgive me, whatever. But so we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna roll this over. I'm gonna put this on my welding bench for now to get it out of the way. We still gotta get the engine out of the truck so we can change all the gaskets on that, change a couple things. And then we still need to do the brakes, the suspension, and everything else. So, but let's go ahead and get started on all that. All right, now we're gonna move on to the wheel cylinders and the brake spring kit. The shoes have plenty of meat, so I'm not going to change the shoes. I'm just going to save some money there. But I will tell you, I ordered FVP proven verified, part number FHH7191, made in China, and it is proven verified not to be the right one. So some of the springs work, some of the springs don't. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to use some of the springs that are in here and some new springs, kind of a hodgepodge. It's not what you're supposed to do. You should use all new springs when you do these, but I'm lazy, and these springs are actually, they're in decent shape other than being dark, but you can see they have been changed before because they're different colors. But I'm not going to walk you through this whole thing. I'll just give you some pointers, like the one spring back here in the back. If you're not going to change it, don't take it off. You can go ahead and leave it on the brake shoe whatchamacallit, lever on there, so you don't have to take this lower spring off. But we'll just run through the rest real quick as soon as I find my seat. All right, now that you have the brake shoes out of the way, I'm going to take my 3/8 line wrench. If you don't have a set of line wrenches when doing brakes and fuel lines, get a set of line wrenches. These things don't round off your B-nuts. I think these are Husky brand. I think I paid 25, 26 bucks for them at Home Depot. But so we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna undo that brake line. Okay, it's kind of hard to see here, but there's that B-nut for the brake line. So go ahead, get your 3/8 wrench on there, break it loose. All right, the line's loose. So now you're going to take all right, now that the line's loose in the back, you're going to take a 3/8 socket and you're going to undo the 2 bolts that hold the wheel cylinder to the backing plate. So as you'll see here, there's your bolts that hold the wheel cylinder on. It's 3/8. All right, these wheel cylinders actually say made in USA, so that tells you how old they are. But go ahead and keep the push rods out of them, you could chunk the rest. Now I will tell you, this wheel cylinder has a line coming in on an angle. The ones I bought, which I'll tell you here in a second, come in straight, so don't follow Rock Auto's advice. All right, so I'm using AC Delco 18 Echo 57, that's 18E is an Echo 57 for your wheel cylinders, and these don't exactly match the old ones either. So hooray for ordering stuff online. The lines on these come in actually a little bit on an angle from the bottom and straight, whereas the other ones were just on an angle from the side. So just bend your line and make it work. Great. Oh, I love Rock Auto. Love Rock Auto. It's never right. All right, once you get the nuts started and the line started, go ahead and tighten down the nuts, tighten up your line, and your wheel cylinder's in. When you're putting everything back together, take your push rods, take a little piece of Scotch-Brite them up, clean them up real clean. I wish the kits came with new ones of these, but the kit I got obviously doesn't. Once it's all back together, go ahead and slide the drum on, and in that little inspection window you'll want to turn the wheel down. So you're taking a screwdriver and you're prying up on the screwdriver so it turns the wheel down till you get a little bit of drag on the drum. So once you get a little bit of drag, you're good to go. Put the wheel back on. That's it for the rear brakes. Other than bleeding, you do have to bleed them, which we'll do that later before we drive the truck. All right, now we got the brakes all put together, back in the back. We still need to bleed them, but we're going to move on to the lowering kit. It's not really a kit, but what I do on this, I just cut the front coils. I'll cut one full coil off. That'll typically give me 1.5 to 2 inch of a drop. We'll go ahead and we'll start on that in the front here. All right, well, we'll start here is I'll go ahead and I'll take off the sway bar end link or end bracket, whatever you want to call it. It's a 9/16 headed bolt on top, and then there's a nut on the bottom, 9/16 as well. I already took out the one bolt, but I'll go ahead and zing this other bolt out. After we get that out, we want to move over and you want to take the lower shock bolt out. That's a 3/4 inch headed bolt and 3/4 inch headed nut. Do not worry about taking the caliper off or the brake hose. After I'll take the shock and the sway bar bracket off, what I'll do is I'll then pull the ball joint nut, which I believe is, I think it's 13/16 or 15/16. You can see it right here. Pull the cotter key. You'll put a jack up underneath the A-arm. Once you put the jack up under the arm, you'll take that nut off and then take the jack out. Be careful that the spring doesn't pop out. I know guys that put chains on them. I'm not too concerned about it in this situation, but we'll go ahead and get that started. All right, you see I got a full coil cut off. I went ahead and knocked off any edges I had on this, and then I spray painted the end of the raw steel just to give it a little bit more protection. All you got to do now is take the spring, flip it back upside down, slip it back in the pocket, and reinstall everything. All right, now that we've got the front suspension put back together, one thing I want to tell you is when you put the castellated nut on the ball joint, never reuse your cotter key. Always put a new steel cotter key in those. And I torque those down pretty much as tight as I can get them with a 1/2 inch breaker bar. I'm not sure what the technical torque is on there, but just as tight as you can get them, and then put your cotter key on through there. Of course, bend it over and all that. But on the rear here, all I'm using for the rear lowering kit is these Chinesium drop shackles. I think these were like 55 bucks on Amazon or eBay, shipped, something like that. But it's a 1 inch or 2 inch drop. So the rear end's about 2.5, 3 inches taller than the front. So we're gonna go ahead and we'll use the full 2 inch drop. So you'll put the bolt for the shackle in the back here. You'll use the top bolt on this drop shackle. So let's go ahead, we'll get the back end jacked up. You want to support the truck by the frame, not by the rear end. Jack it up, support the frame, let the rear axle hang, pull the wheels off, and then that way you can get the bolts out of the shackles. But we'll go ahead and I'll show you how we do it. All right, now that you got the truck jacked up, like I said, you can see the frame is supported. I do have an axle jack underneath the rear axle here. You want to go ahead and you want to loosen the top shackle bolt here. You don't want too much tension up underneath the axle, otherwise you do it, this leaf spring will slam up into the box spot, the bed box. So go ahead, back these nuts off, these bolts off. We got to take this shackle all the way out. The bolt, it looks like it's 13/16 head on both of them. All right, once you get both bolts out, get your crew chief persuader and go ahead and knock the shackle out. The one thing before you put these in, you want to put real good bearing grease and NICs on this bolt, especially if you're in the north, so that you don't anti-seize your bolts in there. And grease the inside of the cup here as well. And then they do come with a Zerk fitting, so you'll pump that full of grease afterwards. But go ahead and grease up your other rubber bushings and the leaf springs if you didn't change them. One thing I want to add is when you put the shackle in, since it's a drop shackle, it's going to hit this cross member. So you've got to clearance this cross member out. Cut it out so that the shackle will have room to move through there as it pivots. So I already did it on the other side, but I'll go ahead and show you doing it on this side. All right, there you have it. So your clearance now for the shackle to go in there. Now just go ahead and throw some spray paint on there just to clean it up a little bit. Ultimately, you probably should box that in, but I'm not too worried about it. All right, one thing I want to show you on the shackle is, if you remember when I first showed you, it did have 2 bolt holes. I said I was using the upper bolt hole. I did change because I didn't want to have to cut the bed so much. I didn't even like having a clearance that bed support as I did, but to get these to work, I had to. So I cut that second bolt hole off, rounded it off, threw some paint on there, and we're just going to go ahead and install the shackle this way. This should hopefully give us a decent enough drop. All right, well, we got her all tightened up, buttoned up, and she's back on the ground. It ended up being a little bit over an inch drop in the rear. The front passenger side seems to be a little bit, about a ½ inch lower than the other side of the truck, so she kind of leans a little bit that way. I don't know what's going on there, but I guess we'll just drive it like that. No big deal. So that's it. I appreciate you checking out Meets Rod Shop. Next thing on this truck here, I'll be pulling the engine out and we'll go through head gaskets, the fuel pump, freeze plugs. I found a bad freeze plug when I was messing with the transmission. So got to get the engine out so we can change the freeze plugs, head gaskets, intake gasket, fuel pump, rear main seal, and then we got to go into the rust repair. So but tune in for that. That'll be another video another time. But I appreciate you checking out the channel. Have a good day, and remember, keep your head up and your stick on the ice.